He jumped out of a plane after a woman he had never met, with no order, no backup, and no guarantee he was coming back. 30,000 people watched from the ground. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. But Caleb Dawson was already gone, a quiet single dad from Phoenix who fixed aircraft for a living, free-falling at 120 miles per hour toward a billionaire who had about 40 seconds left to live. What nobody in that crowd knew. What nobody knew was that this man had done something like this before, in places the government never officially acknowledged, under circumstances that still can't be talked about. And the woman he was chasing through the sky, she didn't fall by accident. Someone sent her there to die. If you're watching this from Dallas, Chicago, Denver, or anywhere across this great country, drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button and ring that bell, because this is the kind of story you do not want to miss the next chapter of. The morning Caleb Dawson saved Victoria Hartwell's life, he was running 17 minutes late and had a peanut butter sandwich stuffed in his jacket pocket. That detail mattered more than people would later realize, because the sandwich was for his daughter. 7-year-old Emma had absolutely insisted on making it herself that morning. She'd pressed the 2 pieces of bread together so hard that the peanut butter oozed out the sides and got on her school uniform, which meant Caleb had to change her shirt, which meant he had to find a clean shirt, which meant he was now standing in the parking lot of Skyline Aviation Services at 7:43 in the morning. 3 minutes before the pre-jump safety inspection was scheduled to begin speed walking across hot Arizona asphalt with a smashed sandwich in his pocket and coffee he hadn't had a single sip of. This was his life. Not glamorous, not extraordinary, just real and his, and most days on the good days enough. Caleb was 34 years old, medium height. The kind of build that didn't announce itself in a room, but didn't disappear either. He had brown eyes that stayed still when other people's moved. He had hands that were slightly too rough for a man who spent most of his days with paperwork and inspection checklists. He drove a 2011 Ford F-150 with a cracked rear taillight he kept meaning to fix, and he coached Emma's Saturday soccer team because nobody else volunteered, and she loved it, and he would have walked through fire for that kid, which, as it turned out, was almost literally what he was about to do, except replace fire with 11,000 feet of open Arizona sky. He pushed through the hangar door. The scene inside was already moving. Skyline had been hired to manage the logistics for the Hartwell Foundation's annual charity skydiving event, a high-profile fundraiser where wealthy donors paid significant amounts of money to jump out of perfectly good aircraft in the name of children's hospitals. The event drew camera sponsors, and this year, the founder herself, Victoria Hartwell, 41 years old, CEO of Hartwell Technologies, a woman whose face had been on the cover of 3 major business magazines in the past 18 months, and whose company had recently been valued somewhere north of $4 billion. Caleb didn't follow business news closely. He knew who she was the same way everyone knew from the occasional headline from the photo his coworker Marcus had shown him on his phone 2 weeks ago when the assignment came in. "Big client this weekend," Marcus had said, grinning. "Try not to be boring around her." Caleb had said, "I'm always boring," and meant it as a compliment to himself. Now he moved through the hangar, setting down his coffee, pulling on his inspection gloves, and reaching for the clipboard that had the morning's equipment manifest. Standard pre-jump protocol. Verify all parachute systems. Check harness integrity. Confirm. Emergency deployment mechanisms. Sign off, move on. He'd done this hundreds of times. He started at the far end of the rack and worked his way methodically toward the front. Primary canopy, reserve canopy, harness buckles, deployment handle, altimeter. He moved quickly, but not carelessly. There was a difference, and Caleb had learned it the hard way in circumstances he didn't discuss at work. He was on the 8th rig when something made him stop. He couldn't have explained it immediately. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a visible crack or a broken strap. It was something smaller, a wrongness in the geometry of the thing. The way a piece sat that was 2 millimeters off from where it should have been, the way a particular component reflected light in a way that suggested it had been recently handled when it shouldn't have been recently handled. Caleb set down the clipboard. He looked at the rig identifier tag, Unit 7, Victoria Hartwell's assigned equipment. Her name was written in neat block letters on the attached manifest card, right there, no ambiguity. He turned the rig over in his hands slowly. His jaw tightened. The emergency deployment mechanism, the fail-safe that a jumper could manually trigger if their primary chute malfunctioned, had been altered. Not broken. Not damaged by wear or accident. Altered. The modification was subtle clean, the kind of precision work that most inspectors, the kind who checked boxes and moved on, would walk right past. Whoever had done this knew exactly what they were doing. They had engineered it to fail. Not immediately. Not in any way that would show up in a ground inspection without close examination. But at deployment altitude under real jump conditions, when Victoria Hartwell pulled that handle and needed it to work, it would not work. Caleb stood very still for a moment. In the hangar, people moved around him. Music played from someone's phone, something upbeat country Tennessee. Outside, he could hear the distant sound of the event setup voices carrying across the tarmac, the thump of equipment cases. He put the rig down on the inspection table. He walked directly to the operations manager, a man named Dennis Pryor, 52, with the confident walk of someone who had been managing events like this for 20 years and had not yet encountered a problem he couldn't reschedule around. "Dennis," Caleb said, "I need to pull Unit 7 from the manifest." Dennis looked up from his tablet. "What?" "Victoria Hartwell's rig. I need to pull it. There's an issue with the emergency deployment mechanism." Dennis stared at him. Then he did the thing people do when they don't want to hear what they're hearing. He looked down at his tablet, then back up as if the problem might have disappeared in the interval. "Caleb, the event starts in 2 hours. I understand that. Victoria Hartwell is the keynote jumper. She's the whole point of—" "Dennis!" Caleb kept his voice completely level. "The emergency deployment on that rig has been modified. If she jumps with it and her primary fails, she dies. I'm not signing off on it." A pause. Dennis set down his tablet. He looked at Caleb the way people sometimes looked at him, like they were trying to decide whether he was being serious or whether this was something manageable, something that could be talked down or around. "Modified how?" Dennis asked. "Professionally. Precisely. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing." Caleb met his eyes. "This wasn't an accident, Dennis." The air between them changed. Dennis opened his mouth, closed it. Then he said, "Stay here," and walked away with his phone already at his ear. Caleb waited. He didn't pace. He didn't check his own phone. He stood by the inspection table with the rig in front of him, and he breathed slowly and steadily, the way you breathe when you've trained yourself to function clearly in moments when other people's anxiety spikes into noise. Dennis came back 7 minutes later with 2 men Caleb didn't recognize. Both were large. Both wore dark clothing that wasn't Skyline Aviation uniforms. Both had the particular posture of men who were paid to stand close to important people and make problems disappear. Security. Victoria's people. The taller of the 2 crew-cut mid-40s, a small scar at the corner of his jaw, spoke first. "Mr. Dawson." "Yes. We understand you've raised a concern about the equipment. I've identified a deliberate modification to the emergency deployment system on Unit 7, Caleb said. I've pulled the rig from active status, and I'm recommending the jump be postponed pending a full. We've reviewed the situation, the man said. His voice was smooth, practiced. The voice of someone who had ended a lot of conversations this way. Our own equipment team has assessed the rig and found it to be within acceptable parameters. Caleb looked at him. Your equipment team assessed it in the last 7 minutes. We have experienced personnel on site. With respect, Caleb said, and he meant that in the most specific sense, no more and no less than the words themselves. Acceptable parameters are not what I identified. I identified deliberate tampering. That is a criminal matter, not an equipment variance matter. Mr. Dawson. The second security man spoke now, shorter, broader, with the flat eyes of someone who had been told to solve this problem quickly. We appreciate your diligence. Ms. Hartwell is aware of your concern. She has decided to proceed. She's been told, Caleb asked. She's been informed that one of the inspection staff flagged a minor concern, yes, and that it's been reviewed and cleared. Caleb felt something cold move through him. She'd been told wrong. He said, "I'd like to speak with her directly." Both men said nothing for exactly 1 second. Then the taller one said, "That won't be possible. Ms. Hartwell is preparing for the event and is not taking individual staff meetings." "Then I need to file a formal incident report and ground the aircraft." "Your incident report," the shorter man said, "will be reviewed through the standard process after the event." He said it without blinking, without any shift in tone. As if this were a completely reasonable thing to say. "We'll look at your warning about the thing that will kill someone right after the thing kills someone." Caleb looked at them both. He understood exactly what was happening. He had seen this before. Not here, not in the aviation inspection world, but in other places, in other circumstances. The same fundamental dynamic. Powerful people with something to protect, using their authority as a wall, betting that a man with a modest job and nothing behind him would back down when the wall went up. They were wrong. But Caleb was smart enough to know that arguing further in this hangar with these two men right now was not going to get him where he needed to go. He nodded once. Understood. He turned and walked back to his station. His heart rate was at 58 beats per minute. He'd checked it without meaning to, a habit, an old reflex from a different life. He had exactly 90 minutes before the event started. I used 45 of them trying to reach someone, anyone who could stop this through legitimate channels. He called the FAA tip line and got an automated system. He called the Skyline Operations Director's direct number and got voicemail. He tried to reach Dennis again, and Dennis's phone went straight to voicemail too, which told him Dennis had been told to be unavailable. He sent a detailed written report to Skyline's safety compliance email and photographed the rig from multiple angles before it was removed from the inspection table and returned to the equipment room by one of Victoria's security staff. Let them explain those photographs later. He stood in the hangar doorway and watched the morning proceed as if nothing had happened. Donors arriving, cameras setting up, staff moving with the bright, organized energy of people who believed today was a celebration. His phone had one unread text. From Emma's school, a reminder about next week's field trip permission slip. He looked at it for a moment. He thought about his daughter in class right now, probably doodling soccer balls in the margins of her notebook, probably counting down to the weekend because he'd promised her they'd go to that reptile museum she'd been asking about for 2 months. He thought about what it had cost him 10 years ago to tell the truth about something dangerous in a place where the truth wasn't wanted. He had lost almost everything. His rank, his career, a marriage that had already been under impossible strain. 2 years of his life that still lived in him in ways he didn't talk about. And he had decided in the rubble of all of it that he would live quietly. He would raise his daughter. He would work a steady job. He would be the man that nobody looked twice at because that man didn't get asked to do impossible things, and impossible things had already taken enough from him. He stood in that doorway for 4 full minutes. Then he put his phone in his pocket, walked to the equipment room, found the spare rig locker, and began checking his own jump gear. The crowd had gathered by 9:30. There were several hundred people on the viewing ground, Donors Press Foundation staff, families of the hospital children the event was raising money for. A small stage had been set up with a podium and 2 large screens that would show aerial footage from the jump aircraft's external cameras. Victoria Hartwell stepped up to the podium at 9:45. Caleb saw her for the first time in person. She was smaller than he expected, not physically diminished, nothing like that. But there was something about the way she stood that was more human than her public photographs allowed. Dark hair pulled back, a pale green jacket over a black jumpsuit, the kind of practical formal combination that said, "I am about to actually do this dangerous thing, and I want to look good doing it." She spoke clearly and warmly about the Foundation's work, about the hospitals, about the children. And Caleb could tell she meant it. This wasn't performance. Whatever else was happening around her, this woman actually cared about the thing she was supposedly here to do. He watched her from near the hangar door, wearing his own rig, which several people had already given him confused looks about. His co-worker Jamie appeared at his elbow. Caleb, why are you geared up? I'm going up. Jamie looked at him. That's not in your job description today. No, Caleb agreed. It's not. Does Dennis know? Dennis is unavailable. Jamie stared at him. Caleb, what's going on? Caleb turned and looked at him directly. Jamie was 26, genuinely decent, the kind of kid who brought coffee for the whole team and remembered everyone's lunch orders. He didn't deserve to be confused by this. The rig that they're putting her in has been tampered with, Caleb said quietly. I reported it. It was dismissed. I can't stop the jump from happening, but I can be on that plane. Jamie's mouth opened. Say nothing, Caleb said. Do your job. Document everything you can after. Caleb. Jamie. His voice was gentle, but it was finished. Trust me. Jamie closed his mouth. Caleb walked toward the aircraft. He got on the plane by being exactly what he was, an aviation worker in the appropriate gear, moving with the confidence of someone who had authorization. Nobody stopped him. Nobody questioned him. When you act like you belong somewhere, where most people decide you belong there. And Caleb had learned this particular truth in circumstances considerably more dangerous than a charity skydiving event. The aircraft was a twin-engine Beechcraft modified for jump operations. 12 seats. The group included 8 donor jumpers, 2 professional jump instructors hired for the event. Victoria and her personal skydiving instructor, a man named Cole, who had reportedly been her jump partner for 3 previous events, and now Caleb sitting near the tail, saying nothing, watching everything. Victoria was seated 4 rows ahead of him. He studied her without being obvious about it. She was composed, focused. She was talking quietly with Cole, reviewing hand signals, apparently going through a mental checklist, the way people do before they do something that genuinely requires courage. A woman running a $4 billion company surrounded by staff, sitting in a plane at 29 years old. 41, and still choosing to do the jump herself because she'd promised she would. He could respect that. Whatever was happening around her, he could respect the person in front of him. He looked at the rig on her back. He confirmed it was Unit 7, the same unit, the one they'd cleared. Caleb breathed slowly. He looked at the altimeter on his own wrist and began counting. The Beechcraft climbed. At 8,000 feet, the jump master announced the first group. At 10,000, the donor group began moving to the exit. At 11,200 feet. Victoria Hartwell stood, checked her harness, exchanged a thumbs up with Cole, looked out the open door at 11,000 feet of open Arizona sky, and jumped. Cole followed. Caleb was already moving. What happened in the next 60 seconds existed in a register that most people never encounter. Later, when investigators asked Caleb to describe it, he would use simple declarative sentences. He would give them facts and sequence. He would not dramatize it because the thing itself was enough. He exited the aircraft. He immediately acquired Victoria's position. She was below and east her body in a slight uncontrolled rotation that was already telling him what he needed to know. The primary canopy was deployed, but malformed, billowing wrong, fighting itself. He could see from his current distance that it was not going to catch correctly. He went into a dive. One thing about freefall that civilians don't understand is not about courage. It is about geometry and physics and the precise application of body position to control velocity and direction. It is a problem with a solution, and the solution requires that you think correctly while the ground approaches at 120 miles per hour. Caleb had done this before. Not in Arizona, not over desert. In other places at night under circumstances that were considerably less controlled than this. He adjusted his angle, tracked the distance, made 3 small corrections that each took less than a second. He reached her. Victoria's eyes found him, and there was a pure moment of human shock. Because who is this? Why is this person here? Nobody was supposed to. And then training overrode shock, and she held still, which was exactly right, which told him something important about her. Caleb did not speak. He reached for the emergency deployment mechanism on her rig. He felt immediately what he'd known he would feel: the resistance of a system that had been precisely, deliberately compromised. This was not going to deploy through normal pull. He had 11 seconds before they needed to be under a canopy. He made a decision. 2 adjustments. Manual override sequence. His fingers moved with the assurance of someone who had trained this exact action in conditions that had made it permanent and reflexive, built into muscle memory, below the level of conscious thought. The mechanism gave. The reserve canopy fired. It caught. Above them, the canopy opened fully and correctly, and the violent downward mathematics of freefall converted with a physical shock that compressed his spine and rattled his back teeth into a manageable guided descent. They swung under the canopy together. The desert spread below them in every direction. The crowd on the ground was a small cluster of color and noise still 700 feet down. Victoria was breathing hard. Caleb checked her harness connections, verified the canopy, scanned the sky for the other jumpers. Victoria Hartwell, billionaire CEO woman who had just survived a deliberate attempt on her life at 11,000 feet above the Arizona desert, turned her head and looked at him. She said, "You. Who are you?" Her voice was remarkably steady for someone who had just come within about 9 seconds of dying. Caleb looked at her. The ground was coming up. He had maybe 30 seconds before they needed to be in landing position. He said, "Caleb Dawson, I work in aircraft inspection." She stared at him. "You inspected that rig this morning?" she said. "Yes." "And you reported it?" It wasn't a question. She'd already connected it. Smart woman. "Yes," he said. "They told me you raised a minor concern," she said. "They told me it had been reviewed and cleared." "I know what they told you." Another pause. Below them, the crowd had clearly seen the canopy open. He could hear even at this distance the sound of it. That specific sound. People realizing the disaster they were watching had turned into something else. "They lied to me," Victoria said. It wasn't a question either. "Yes," Caleb said. She was quiet for a moment. "That rig was modified," she said. "Yes." "Deliberately." "Yes." The ground was coming up faster. Caleb shifted position slightly, communicated through body language what he needed her to do for landing, and she followed it correctly and immediately again. Someone who had done this before, who trusted the person next to her when the alternative was worse. They landed cleanly on the edge of the designated drop zone. The crowd was moving toward them. Staff security event personnel, and behind them, the slow surge of people who didn't know what they'd just witnessed, but understood that something had happened that was not in the event program. Victoria stood. She pulled off her helmet. She looked at Caleb with an expression that was not gratitude, yet that would come later when the shock finished processing. What it was right now was something more raw and immediate than gratitude. It was the expression of someone who had just realized they had been standing on a trapdoor. 2 of her security team reached them first, including the taller man with the crew cut and the scar who had told Caleb 90 minutes ago that the rig had been reviewed and cleared by their experienced personnel. He reached for Victoria's arm. She stepped back. "Don't," she said. He stopped. Something in her voice, quiet, absolute, the voice of a woman who ran a $4 billion company and had just survived an attempt on her life, stopped him completely. She looked at Caleb. "I want to know everything," she said. "From the beginning. All of it." Caleb nodded. Around them, the Arizona morning continued bright, hot, indifferent. The cameras on the drop zone were still rolling. People were still moving toward them. Somewhere in the crowd, someone was already on their phone. He had just broken every quiet rule he'd built his life around. He had jumped out of a plane after a stranger. He had used skills he never talked about, never displayed, never admitted to anyone in his current life. Not his co-workers, not his neighbors, not the other soccer dads on Saturday mornings. He had done it because the alternative was watching someone die when he could stop it. And now, Victoria Hartwell was looking at him with eyes that were already asking the next question, the real question, the one beneath the surface. "Who are you actually, and why do you move like that, and how did you do what you just did?" He didn't answer it. Not yet. Because some answers once given change everything. And Caleb Dawson had learned at great cost in a previous life that everything changing was not always a thing you could come back from. But he also knew standing on that drop zone in the Arizona heat, with the crowd moving toward them and the cameras still rolling, and a billionaire looking at him with the particular attention of someone who didn't miss things, that the calculation had already shifted. Because there were people with money and influence, and the willingness to engineer a woman's death and blame it on equipment failure, who knew his face now. Who knew he'd been on that plane? Who knew he'd gotten in the way of something that was supposed to be clean and done? And whatever quiet life he'd been living this morning with the peanut butter sandwich and the cracked taillight and the Saturday soccer games, that life was already behind him. The desert wind moved across the drop zone. Caleb stood still in the middle of it, the way he always stood, like a man who had learned to be the stillest thing in a room full of movement. And he waited. Because in his experience, what came next was never what you expected, and you had to be ready for it anyway. 9 seconds. That was how close Victoria Hartwell had come to dying. 9 seconds. Caleb had calculated it on the way down, not because he was trying to frighten himself, but because precision was how his mind worked. Under pressure had always worked that way since long before he had a job title or a daughter, or a cracked taillight on a truck he kept meaning to fix. 9 seconds between the moment her emergency deployment should have fired and the moment impact would have been unsurvivable. 9 seconds was not a close call. 9 seconds was a verdict that someone had already written and expected to be final. He thought about that number while Victoria's security team formed a loose perimeter around them on the drop zone, and the crowd pushed closer, and cameras swung in their direction, and the whole bright organized machinery of the charity event began to realize that something had gone wrong or right, depending on where you were standing, in a way that nobody had planned for. The taller security man, the one with the crew cut and the scar, whose name Caleb still didn't know, had not moved since Victoria told him, "Don't." He stood with his hand half extended, frozen in that position, and Caleb watched him with the kind of attention that didn't look like attention. Peripheral. Constant. The way you watch a door without staring at it. Victoria pulled off her jump gloves one finger at a time. She was putting herself back together. Caleb recognized the process. You do it after something that nearly ends you. You find a small physical action, something deliberate and controlled, and you execute it with precision, and it reminds your nervous system that you are still here, still running, still in charge of your own hands. She dropped the gloves on the ground and looked at the crew-cut man. "What's your name?" she said. He blinked. "Ma'am." "Your name. What is it?" "Garrett, ma'am. Kevin Garrett." "Kevin." She said it flatly, the way you say a word when you're deciding what it means. "You told me this morning that the inspector's concern had been reviewed and cleared." Garrett's jaw moved slightly. "That's a correct. Our don't." She said it exactly the way she'd said it 30 seconds ago. Same tone, same absolute quiet. "Do not explain. Do not contextualize. Just answer me. Did you personally examine that parachute rig?" A pause that lasted approximately 2 seconds too long. "Our equipment team. Did you personally examine it?" "No, ma'am." "Did anyone on your team personally examine it?" Another pause. Shorter this time, because Garrett was smart enough to know that the length of the pause was itself an answer. The assessment was based on Kevin. Victoria took one step toward him. Just one. She was several inches shorter than him, and it didn't matter at all. "That parachute was designed to kill me. Someone built it to fail at the exact moment I needed it to work. And 9 hours ago, this man," she gestured toward Caleb without looking at him, "tried to tell you that, and you put me on the aircraft anyway." The drop zone had gone quiet enough that people 20 feet away could hear every word. Garrett said nothing. "You're going to give me your phone," Victoria said. "Right now, you're going to step back, and you are going to speak to absolutely nobody until I decide what happens next. Are we clear?" Garrett looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and handed her the phone. She turned to Caleb. "Talk," she said. They moved away from the crowd, not far, just enough. 2 of the Skyline ground staff had appeared with a folding table and some bottled water, because that was what ground staff did when events went sideways. They appeared with water and folding tables, and Caleb had always found that oddly comforting. The baseline human instinct toward making things slightly more organized in the middle of chaos. He told her everything. He didn't frame it. He didn't build a case or organize it into a presentation. He simply told her what he had found when he had found it, what he had done about it, and what had been done about what he had done. Straight sequence. Clean facts. She listened without interrupting. That impressed him, actually. Most people interrupt. They ask clarifying questions at the wrong moment, or they jump to conclusions that require walking back, or they perform the act of listening without actually doing it. Victoria listened the way he would have wanted to be listened to, completely, with her eyes on his face, processing without responding until he was finished. When he stopped talking, she was quiet for 4 or 5 seconds. Then she said, "The modification. You said it was professional. What do you mean by professional?" "I mean it wasn't improvised," Caleb said. Whoever did it had technical knowledge of this specific equipment. They knew exactly where to make the adjustment to produce a failure that looked like a manufacturing defect under standard inspection. They knew how much force to apply, and to what component, and at what point in the deployment sequence it would give way. He paused. This was not someone who watched a YouTube video. This was someone who understood parachute systems at an expert level. Victoria absorbed that. Or someone who paid someone who did. Yes. Could it have been inside the event someone on the Skyline staff or one of my own people? The rig was locked in the equipment room overnight, Caleb said. Your security team had access. The Skyline equipment staff had access. Anyone who knew the manifest and had the right credentials could have gotten in. So it could be someone I trust. Yes. She looked at him directly. Not the way most people looked at him, as an aviation worker, as a man filling a functional role, as someone whose primary defining characteristic was their job title. She looked at him as a specific person, and he could feel her trying to figure out what kind of specific person. That thing you did in the air, she said. The manual override. Cole is my instructor. He's been jumping for 20 years, and he told me 5 minutes ago he didn't know that sequence existed. Caleb said nothing. Aircraft inspectors don't know that sequence, Victoria said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement she was placing between them and waiting to see what he did with it. He said, I have some background beyond my current position. Military. A beat. Yes. Which branch? He looked at her. He had not said this to anyone, not in Phoenix, not in the 6 years since he'd come home, and quietly rebuilt himself into someone whose past didn't follow him into rooms. Navy, he said. Victoria waited. Special operations, he said. She nodded slowly. Something shifted in her face, not surprise exactly, more like confirmation. Like she'd already half known and was now adjusting to fully knowing. Why does nobody know that about you? She said. Because I chose it that way. Why? Because the last time I let that part of my life show, Caleb said, it cost me things I'm still paying for. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once and didn't push on it, which told him something important about her. Okay, she said. Here's what I know. Someone tried to kill me today. Someone with access expertise and a plan. And the only reason it didn't work is because you were paying attention. She picked up her water bottle. What I don't know is why, and I need to know why. There are people who benefit if you're gone, Caleb said. That's a category, not an answer. I know. I don't have the answer. You do. She looked at him sharply. What do you mean? You know your own company, Caleb said. You know who benefits. You know what's on the table right now. I know nothing about your business. But someone in your world decided today was the day. That means something specific is happening. A deal, a decision, a transition, something with a deadline. And that deadline is probably very close. Victoria set the water bottle down, and for the first time since he'd landed next to her on this drop zone, something moved across her face that wasn't composure or focus or the controlled processing of a crisis. It was something older and quieter. Something that looked just for a moment like the expression of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just been told that the weight is real. There is a vote, she said. Caleb waited. Board of Directors, 6 days from now. She was speaking carefully the way people speak when they're deciding how much to say while they're saying it. There's a proposed restructuring of executive authority. If it passes, certain people gain significant control of operational decisions. If it fails, I retain full authority, and we proceed with an acquisition I've been building for 2 years. And if you're dead or incapacitated before the vote, control transfers to an interim leadership structure under the board's appointed chairman. Who is the appointed chairman? Victoria looked at him. His name is Richard Ashby, she said. The name meant nothing to Caleb. He's been on the board for 11 years, Victoria said. He was my father's choice originally. I've spent most of the last 3 years managing his interference. She paused. If that vote fails and I retain authority, Ashby loses everything he's been building. He loses the restructuring, the appointments, the consulting contracts he's quietly arranged for his people. She paused again. He loses the acquisition target he's been trying to position himself inside for 18 months. How much is at stake financially? For Ashby personally, Victoria calculated. Conservatively, 9 figures. Caleb absorbed that. 9 figures. Hundreds of millions of dollars. Enough money to make a very specific kind of person decide that engineering an accident was a better option than losing. Does Ashby have the technical knowledge to modify a parachute rig? Caleb said. No, but he has... Victoria stopped. Caleb waited. He has a security consultant, she said slowly. A man he brought in about 14 months ago. Former military, he said. Eastern European background. I've only met him twice. He makes me uncomfortable. She looked up. He's here today. He was on the pre-event security team. Everything in Caleb's body went very still. What's his name? He said. Reeves, Victoria said. Marcus Reeves. Although I've sometimes wondered if that's his actual name. Caleb said, describe him. 40, maybe 45. Blonde going gray at the temples. Medium build. Very contained the way he moves is... She stopped again. Her eyes went to Caleb's face. Like the way you move, she said quietly. He's still on site, Caleb said. He should be. He was scheduled to stay through the post-event debrief. Then we have a problem. Why? Because if he did this, and I'm still alive, and we're sitting here talking about it, he already knows his plan failed. And a man like that... Caleb glanced around the perimeter of the drop zone, a quick scan that took 2 seconds and covered the entire visible area. A man like that does not leave loose ends. Victoria went very still. He'd try again, she said. Today, Caleb said. Before this becomes a formal investigation. Before anyone gets to the phones and the security footage and the equipment chain of custody. He looked at her. Where is he right now? I don't know. Who does? Victoria pulled out her phone and called someone. 3 seconds. Donna. Where is Marcus Reeves right now? Now, the security consultant. A pause. When? Another pause. Her face changed. Don't let him, Donna, stop him. Tell him. A longer pause. Donna. Victoria pulled the phone from her ear. She looked at Caleb. He left, she said. 15 minutes ago. Said he had a family emergency. Nobody stopped him. 15 minutes ago. While they were still on the drop zone. While the crowd was still processing what had happened. Reeves had seen everything he needed to see, understood everything he needed to understand, and walked out before anyone thought to ask where he was going. Professional. Caleb said, you need to call the police, right now, not the event security, actual law enforcement, and you need to do it in the next 3 minutes because if you wait longer, he's in a car, and if he's in a car, he has options. I'll call. Don't use Garrett's team to relay anything, Caleb said. Not yet. Not until you know exactly whose side they're on. Victoria looked at him. You think someone on my own security detail is involved? I think Reeves had access to that equipment room. I think he'd need someone to facilitate that access. Garrett told you the rig was cleared when nobody had actually examined it. Caleb kept his voice level. I'm not saying Garrett is involved. I'm saying you can't assume he's not. He watched her face as she processed this. watched the moment when she understood what it meant that the people whose entire purpose was to stand between her and danger might be some of them on the wrong side of her. She dialed 911 herself. He listened to her speak to the dispatcher, clear, concise, urgent, without being hysterical. She gave her name, the location, a summary of the situation. She requested both law enforcement and an investigative unit. She requested a preservation order on all equipment on site. She did all of this in about 90 seconds, and then she hung up and looked at Caleb with that same flat directness. "They'll be here in 12 minutes, she said. "Good. What do we do until then?" "We stay visible," Caleb said. "In the open with witnesses. If Reeves comes back or sends anyone back, public visibility is the best protection we have right now." "You think he'd come back?" "I think a man who engineered a parachute modification that was supposed to look like an accident has a very specific investment in controlling what gets said and documented in the next hour. And I think—" Caleb paused, the particular pause of someone choosing their words with precision. "I think we need to be very careful about which of your people you trust with information right now." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "You know what the worst part is," she said. "What?" "I'm not surprised." She said it without self-pity, without performance. Just a plain statement that had a long history behind it. "I've known something was wrong for months. The way certain meetings went sideways. The way information moved that should have been contained. The way Ashby always seemed to know things before he should have." She shook her head. "I built something worth billions of dollars, and I've spent the last year fighting people inside my own walls." "Then you already know who you're dealing with," Caleb said. "Knowing and proving are different things." "Yes," Caleb said. "They are." He looked at her. "But what happened today? The modification, the dismissal of my report. Reeves leaving the site 15 minutes after the jump, that's a chain. And chains have evidence." "If someone hasn't already destroyed it." "The rig is in my photographs," Caleb said. "I sent them to Skyline's compliance email before they moved it. That's time-stamped documentation of the modification before the jump. That's admissible." She looked at him. "You thought ahead," she said. "I've been here before," he said simply. She held his gaze for a moment, and something moved in her eyes that was more personal than anything that had passed between them in the last 20 minutes. A recognition of something. A person who had been dismissed and marginalized and quietly moved out of the way, seeing another person who had lived the same experience from a different angle. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah. Thank you." He nodded, not deflecting it, not dismissing it, just receiving it and letting it mean what it meant. "There's something else," she said. Her voice shifted, lower, more careful. "This morning before the event, I found something in my email." She paused. "An anonymous message. No identifying information, no traceable address. It said that I needed to be careful today. That someone wanted the event to go wrong." She looked at him. "I thought it was a disgruntled employee. I forwarded it to Garrett." Caleb was very still. "You forwarded it to Garrett," he said. "Yes, and Garrett is the one who told you my concern about the rig had been cleared." The sequence landed. Victoria's jaw tightened. "He knew," she said. "He received a warning that something was going to happen. And then when something happened, when you flagged it, he buried it." "Or," Caleb said carefully, "someone knew Garrett would bury it and sent the warning knowing it would never reach you, which means the warning wasn't really for you." She stared at him. "The warning was for Garrett," Caleb said. "It was a signal, a confirmation, telling him it was happening today, so he knew to be ready to handle anything that came up." Victoria sat with that for a moment. The machinery of it, the layers. "They're very organized," she said. "Yes. And they've been doing this for a long time." "Probably." She straightened. Something hardened in her posture, not the brittleness of anger, but the solidity of decision. He recognized it. The moment when a person stops processing what happened and starts deciding what comes next. "I want everything documented," she said. "Every conversation since this morning. Every person who had access to that rig. Every communication that went through Garrett's phone." She paused. I have lawyers who can move very fast. Law enforcement first, Caleb said. Let the police establish the evidence chain. Your lawyers come after, or they'll have standing challenges. She nodded, accepting the correction without ego. Then she looked at him sideways. You know a lot about evidence chains for an aircraft inspector. I told you I have some background. Special operations, she said. Navy. But that's not the whole story. He didn't answer. You reported a safety issue once before, she said. It wasn't a question. And it cost you. That's what you said. You lost your military career. He was quiet for a moment. There was a situation, he said finally. Equipment failure deliberate. Similar to this in some ways. I reported it. The people above me had reasons to want it quiet. He looked at his own hands. It got quiet. And then the thing I reported happened anyway, and people got hurt. And by then, everything had been managed well enough that it stopped being my report and started being my fault. Victoria was very still. That's why you left, she said. I didn't leave, Caleb said. I was separated. There's a difference. What happened to the people responsible? They were promoted, he said, simply, factually. The flatness of a man who had processed this and set it down mostly and just picked it up again briefly to answer a question. Victoria didn't say she was sorry. He was glad for that. She looked at him like what he'd said actually meant something, which was better. And you still jumped, she said. Today, after that. You could have filed your report, walked away, covered yourself. But you got on that plane. Yes. Why? He thought about Emma's sandwich in his jacket pocket. He thought about Saturday soccer. He thought about what it cost a 7-year-old girl to understand why her father was quiet sometimes in ways she couldn't reach. Because the last time I let the system handle it, he said, it didn't. The Arizona sun was full and hard, and the drop zone was crowded with people moving in every direction, and somewhere in the distance a siren was beginning. The first police unit 12 minutes coming in under 12. Victoria Hartwell looked at Caleb Dawson for a long moment. Then she said, I'm going to need your help with what comes next. And Caleb, who had built his entire post-military life on the decision to need nothing and be needed by no one, outside of a 7-year-old girl with a soccer obsession and strong opinions about peanut butter sandwiches, felt something shift in his chest that he hadn't expected and couldn't quite name. He said, Tell me what you know about Richard Ashby. She told him, and while she talked, and the sirens got closer, and the Arizona morning moved forward without asking anyone's permission. The thing that had been set in motion long before this day, by whoever sat in a quiet room and decided that Victoria Hartwell's death was a problem worth solving, began to turn back toward the people who had started it. Not because justice was automatic, not because the right things always happened when decent people tried to make them happen, but because the man, they hadn't accounted for the man. Nobody noticed the quiet father with the rough hands and the cracked taillight was paying attention. He was still paying attention, and he was not going to stop. The first police unit arrived at 10:47 in the morning. 2 officers, then 4, then a detective named Sandra Okafor, who came in a plain sedan and moved through the drop zone with the particular efficiency of someone who had learned a long time ago that the first 15 minutes of any serious investigation determined 60% of what you would ever actually know. She was mid-40s, compact with close-cropped hair, and eyes that cataloged everything they touched without appearing to look at anything directly. She found Caleb and Victoria standing near the folding table. She looked at Caleb first, then at Victoria, then back at Caleb. You're the inspector, she said to Caleb. Yes. And you jumped after her? Yes. She wrote something in her notebook. Why don't we start there, she said. So they did. Caleb told it the same way he'd told Victoria, straight sequence, clean facts, no dramatization. Detective Okafor listened without interrupting the same way Victoria had, and he found himself appreciating it again. She asked 3 clarifying questions at the end. She requested his phone immediately, and he unlocked it and handed it over, and watched her scroll to the photographs he'd taken of Unit 7 before the jump. She studied them for a long moment. These are time-stamped 8:52 this morning, she said. Yes, before the jump. And you sent them to Skyline's compliance email. At 8:54. She looked up from the phone. Something had shifted slightly in her face, the particular shift of a detective who has just confirmed that something is real. "Mr. Dawson," she said carefully, "these photographs show a modification that our forensic team is going to need to examine in detail. But even at a first look..." She paused. "This is not an accident." "No," Caleb said. "It's not." She handed his phone back. "I need you to stay available, both of you. Nobody leaves this site until I say so." She looked at Victoria. "Ms. Hartwell, I understand you have concerns about members of your security team. Specific concerns about one individual," Victoria said. "Kevin Garrett. He received a warning this morning that the event might be compromised. He forwarded that warning to no one and then actively dismissed the inspector's report about the rig." Okafor's pen moved. "And the individual named Marcus Reeves," Victoria continued. "He was on my contracted security team. He left the site approximately 15 minutes after the jump. He told a staff member he had a family emergency. Do you have contact information for Reeves?" "My assistant is pulling it now, although I suspect the number will be inactive." Okafor looked at her steadily. "Why do you suspect that?" "Because a man sophisticated enough to engineer what happened today is sophisticated enough to use a disposable phone." Okafor nodded once. Then she excused herself and moved away already on her radio. Garrett had been separated from the group. By then 2 officers had positioned themselves near him with the specific courtesy that meant he was not under arrest, but was absolutely not going anywhere. He stood with his arms at his sides and his face arranged in the expression of a man who was constructing a story and had not yet finished it. Caleb watched him from across the drop zone. Jamie appeared at Caleb's left shoulder. His young coworker had been hovering at the edge of events for the past 30 minutes, clearly wanting to say something and not knowing how to start. "I documented everything," Jamie said quietly. "Like you told me. Equipment manifest access log for the equipment room, the timeline of when the rig was moved after you flagged it. I put it all in an email to myself with a timestamp." Caleb turned and looked at him. "Good man," he said. Jamie exhaled. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How did you know?" Jamie said. "I mean the modification you described. Our whole team walked past that rig this morning. I walked past it. How did you see it when none of us did?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "You were looking for what was wrong," he said. "I was looking for what was different." Jamie stared at him. "What's the difference? When something is wrong, it breaks a rule, you know. When something is different, it breaks a pattern you've felt." He paused. "The rig looked right by every rule in the manual, but it didn't feel right, and I've learned to trust the feeling over the rule." Jamie was quiet, processing that. "Where did you learn that?" he said. Caleb said, "Somewhere else," and left it there. It was 11:23 when Detective Okafor came back. Her face had changed. Not dramatically, she was too controlled for dramatic, but there was a tightness around her mouth that hadn't been there 20 minutes ago. "Mr. Dawson," she said, "can I speak with you privately for a moment?" They moved away from the group. "We ran Marcus Reeves through the system," she said. "The name and identification he provided to the Hartwell Foundation security team match a real person. Marcus Allen Reeves, 43, former Army Ranger security contractor based out of Dallas." She paused. "The real Marcus Reeves has been on a fishing trip in Montana for the last 10 days. His wife confirmed it. He has no connection to the Hartwell Foundation and was not hired by anyone for this event." Caleb took that in. "Someone stole his identity," Caleb said, "and used it to get credentialed onto the security team, which means whoever did this," Okafor spoke carefully, "had access to legitimate military personnel records. They found a real former soldier with the right background, created a parallel identity, and inserted it into the Foundation's contractor vetting process." "That's not improvised," Caleb said. "No, it is not." She looked at him directly. "This required insider knowledge of how security contractor vetting works and access to information that is not publicly available." She paused. "Which raises the question of how deep this goes and how long it's been in preparation." Caleb said, "The board vote is in 6 days." Okafor looked at him sharply. What vote? Victoria needs to tell you this herself, Caleb said. But the short version is that there is a significant financial and governance event in 6 days. If Victoria is dead or incapacitated before that vote, control of her company shifts to people who benefit enormously. This was not opportunistic. It was planned around a deadline. Okafor wrote in her notebook for 15 seconds without speaking. Then she said, "Mr. Dawson, I've been a detective for 16 years. I've worked organized crime cases, corporate fraud cases. One case involving a contracted killing that took us 4 years to build into something prosecutable." She looked up. "What you're describing, the identity theft, the equipment modification, the insider access, the timeline. This is not amateur work. These are people with resources and patience." "I know," Caleb said, "which means Victoria Hartwell is still in danger." "I know that too." "And you," Okafor said. "You're a witness. You're also the person who physically intervened and prevented their plan from succeeding. In my experience, people who plan this carefully don't enjoy having their plans physically intervened upon." Caleb held her gaze. "I've been in situations where people wanted me to disappear," he said. "It's not a new experience." She studied him for a moment. "How much of your military background can you tell me about?" "Enough to say I have training and experience relevant to this situation, and that some of the specifics are still," he paused, "not fully releasable." "Special operations?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "All right. I'm going to be honest with you because I think you're the kind of person who responds better to honesty than to management." She closed her notebook. "I can put officers on Victoria Hartwell for the next 48 hours. I can open a formal investigation and start pulling threads on the board member you mentioned. But this is going to take time to build, and in the meantime, whoever orchestrated this knows it failed, and they have 6 days before their deadline." "Meaning they'll try again," Caleb said. "Meaning they have significant motivation to try again," Okafor said. "And this time, they'll know that Victoria has a very capable person in her corner." "Which makes me a target too," Caleb said. "Yes." He breathed through that for a second. Not the fear of it that was manageable, that was old territory, but the calculation of what it meant for Emma. For the life he'd been quietly living. For the man he'd decided to be. "My daughter is at school right now," he said. Okafor looked at him. Something shifted in her face, the detective briefly becoming the human underneath. "How old?" "7." A pause. "I'll have a unit positioned near the school," she said. Discreetly. "She won't know it's there." She met his eyes. "You have my word." He nodded. He believed her. Sometimes you had to decide to believe people, and you made that decision based on what you could read in them, and he could read Okafor clearly enough. "One more thing," Okafor said. "Kevin Garrett. He's not talking. He's asked for a lawyer, and he's not saying a word which—" She paused. "Which is either evidence of guilt or good legal instincts. We'll find out." She looked at Caleb. "The warning email Victoria received this morning, the anonymous one she forwarded to Garrett. Can you walk me through why you think that was a coordination signal rather than an actual warning?" Caleb explained his reasoning. She listened, asked 2 questions, wrote for a while. When she finished, she said, "That's either very smart thinking or very imaginative thinking." "In my experience," Caleb said, "when the situation is complicated enough, there's not much difference." She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. She went back to her team. Caleb stood for a moment in the middle of the drop zone. The crowd had thinned. Most of the donor group had been asked to stay, but were now clustered in small anxious knots, their charity skydiving adventure having become something considerably more serious. The cameras were gone, which surprised him until he realized that 2 of Okafor's officers had very politely ensured that all footage captured at the site was preserved as potential evidence. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He stared at it for a moment. Then he answered. Silence for 2 seconds. Then a voicemail, flat effect, slight accent that Caleb couldn't immediately place. Eastern European, possibly. Or somewhere that had trained itself to sound like nowhere. "You should have stayed on the ground," the voice said. Caleb said nothing. "This doesn't have to involve you further," the voice said. "You did your job. You reported the problem. What happened after is not your responsibility. Caleb kept his voice completely neutral. Who is this? Someone giving you good advice. A pause. You have a daughter, Emma. 2nd grade Riverside Elementary. She made a sandwich for you this morning. Everything in Caleb's body went absolutely still. The sandwich. He had not told anyone about the sandwich. It had not been mentioned in any of the conversations since the jump. It was a private detail from a private morning in a private life, which meant someone had been watching him this morning, at his house, before he left for work. Walk away, the voice said. Take your daughter. Go back to your life. Nobody needs to know you were here today. Caleb said, The police already know I was here. Police investigations move slowly, the voice said. Slower than you'd hope when certain people apply certain pressures. And then they close. Cold cases. Insufficient evidence. You know how it works. I have photographs, Caleb said. Photographs are documents, the voice said. Documents can be recontextualized. Evidence can be questioned. What cannot be questioned is the safety of a 7-year-old girl at Riverside Elementary. A pause. One deliberate beat. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Caleb's jaw was iron. I understand exactly what you're telling me, he said. Good. The voice shifted slightly softer, which was somehow worse than its flat effect. You're a smart man. You served your country. You've done your part. Nobody should have to sacrifice their child on top of everything else they've already given. The call ended. Caleb stood with the phone at his side for 4 full seconds. Then he moved. He crossed the drop zone in 20 steps and found Detective Okafor. I just received a call, he said. Unknown number, threatening. They mentioned my daughter's school by name and a specific personal detail that they could only know from direct surveillance of my home this morning. He kept his voice flat and even, because if he let the emotion out right now, it would not help anything. I need units at Riverside Elementary immediately. Not discreetly, visibly. I want whoever is watching that school to see that we know. Okafor was already on her radio before he finished the sentence. While she coordinated, Caleb called Emma's school on his cell. He asked for the front office. He told the woman who answered calmly, because panic was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. That there was a security situation unrelated to the school itself, that the police would be arriving, that Emma was not to be released to anyone other than him personally, that they should confirm his identity with a call back to his cell before doing anything. The woman said, Sir, is Emma in danger? Caleb said, She will not be if everyone does exactly what I'm telling you. He hung up. Victoria had appeared beside him without him hearing her approach, which was notable because Caleb generally heard people approach. What happened? She said. They called me, warned me off, mentioned Emma. He looked at her. They were watching my house this morning. He watched something move across Victoria's face that he hadn't expected. Not strategic calculation. Not the focused executive response she'd been operating on for the last 2 hours. Something closer to guilt. Raw and sudden and real. Caleb, she said. Don't, he said, not harshly, but firmly. Don't apologize for something they did. That's not how this works. If something happens to her because of, nothing is going to happen to her, he said. I'm going to make sure of that. But I need you to stay focused, because what they're doing right now, calling me threatening Emma, that's not confidence, that's desperation. Confident people don't threaten 7-year-olds. They do it when the plan is already broken, and they're trying to contain damage. Victoria looked at him. How are you this calm? She said. I'm not calm, he said. I'm controlled. There's a difference. He met her eyes. And I learned it because calm doesn't save anyone. Control does. She nodded. She pulled herself back together. He watched her do it, the same deliberate physical settling she'd done on the drop zone, and she said, What do we do? You call your lawyers right now, Caleb said. Not in an hour, now. You get them on the phone and you tell them there is an active threat against your life connected to the board vote in 6 days, and you need emergency injunctive action to freeze any board proceedings pending a criminal investigation. Can you do that? Yes. You also call 2 or 3 board members. You absolutely trust people who are not aligned with Ashby, and you tell them what happened today before Ashby gets to them first with his version. He'll have his version ready, Victoria said. Of course he will, which is why you move first. Caleb checked the time. It was 11:41. Every minute you wait, he's managing the narrative. He knows the jump went wrong. He knows you're alive. He knows law enforcement is here. Right now, he's deciding how to explain all of that in a way that doesn't lead back to him. Victoria already had her phone out. She dialed. It rang twice. A man's voice answered, sharp, professional, the voice of someone whose phone never went to voicemail. Daniel, Victoria said. Listen carefully and don't interrupt me. She walked away from Caleb, speaking quickly and precisely. He turned back to Okafor, who had finished her radio coordination and was walking back toward him. Units en route to Riverside Elementary, she said. 2 marked cars. The school has been notified through our dispatch. She looked at him. Did you record the call? No. It came in before I thought to. The phone number. He showed her his call log. She photographed it. We'll try to trace it, she said. But if they're smart. They used a burner, Caleb said. Already disposed of. Probably, but we try anyway. She put her phone away. The call itself is significant. It tells us they're monitoring you. It tells us they have resources beyond the event advanced surveillance operational capacity outside the site. She paused. And it tells us they're scared. That's what I told Victoria. Okafor looked at him. It also tells us they've now shifted from 1 target to potentially 2. Her voice was precise. You are now a person of interest to people who have already demonstrated willingness to kill. I want to be very clear about that. Understood. Do you have somewhere to take your daughter? Somewhere not connected to your home address? He thought. His sister lived in Tucson, 2 hours away. Her address had never been associated with him in any public record he was aware of. She would ask no questions that mattered and answer every question that did. Yes, he said. Tonight after you collect her from school, I'd recommend using it. He nodded. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number he recognized. His coworker, Marcus. Different. Marcus from Reeves. His actual coworker, Marcus Chen, who had shown him Victoria's photo 2 weeks ago on his phone, and said, try not to be boring. He answered. Caleb. Marcus's voice was tight. I just got a call from someone who said they were from Skyline's legal department. They said there's going to be a liability review and that my name came up in connection with the Unit 7 inspection. They said I should get a lawyer and not talk to the police without one. A pause. Caleb. What is going on? Caleb closed his eyes briefly. They were moving fast. They were already trying to spread the contamination, suggest that the Skyline staff were liable, create confusion about who had inspected what, muddy the water around the evidence chain. Marcus, he said. Who called you? A man named Harkins. Said he was from Skyline's legal. Did he give you a callback number? Yeah. Don't call it back. It's not Skyline's legal team. He kept his voice steady. Are you on site right now? I'm in the parking lot. I was about to leave. Stay there. Go back inside. Find Detective Okafor. She's the lead detective. She's on the drop zone. And tell her exactly what you just told me. The name Harkins, the number they gave you, everything. Can you do that? Yeah, but... Marcus, you've done nothing wrong. You're not in trouble, but I need you to do this right now. A pause. Okay, Marcus said. Okay, I'm going. Caleb hung up. He turned to Okafor. They're making calls to Skyline staff, trying to create liability confusion and discourage cooperation with your investigation. Okafor's expression didn't change. She pulled out her radio again. What's the name? She said. Harkins, unknown first name. She called it in. It was 11:58 when the next thing happened. One of the uniformed officers, young, maybe 25. The kind of young that still showed on his face, came across the drop zone at a pace that was just below running. He found Okafor and leaned in and said something quietly. Okafor's face did something Caleb hadn't seen it do yet. It went completely still. She looked at Caleb. Kevin Garrett, she said. What about him? He's gone. Caleb stared at her. He was under observation. He asked to use the restroom facility at the edge of the site. Officer stayed outside. After 8 minutes, the officer checked inside. She paused. There's an exterior window. It's been opened from the inside. Garrett is not on the site. The drop zone felt suddenly different. Garrett had been willing to give up his phone, willing to stand quietly with 2 officers for 45 minutes, willing to play the role of cooperative subject. All of it patient, calculated, exactly long enough to see which direction the situation was developing, and then exit before it developed far enough to formally hold him. Professional. He had help, Caleb said. Someone was watching for the right moment. The Harkins calls to the Skyline staff that was simultaneous. Distraction and extraction at the same time. Okafor was already moving, already on her radio, already pulling the full weight of her department into motion. She coordinated fast APB on Garrett description, last known clothing vehicle plates from the event registration if he'd driven himself. Caleb stood in the middle of all of it and did something nobody around him would have understood. He went quiet inside. Not calm. Control. The distinction he'd explained to Victoria 20 minutes ago now applied to himself. He let the noise happen around him, and he went to the still center of it, and he thought. Garrett was gone. Reeves, or whoever he was already gone. The Harkins calls were an organized response. These were not panicking people. These were people executing a contingency plan that had been prepared in advance, because people this careful always prepared contingencies. Which meant they had anticipated the possibility that the jump would not succeed. Which meant they had a next move. And Caleb did not yet know what it was. He walked to Victoria, who had finished her phone calls, and was standing with her arms crossed, not defensively, just the posture of a person who has been in motion for hours, and has briefly stopped and doesn't quite know what to do with her body. Your lawyers, he said. What's the status? Daniel, my lead attorney, is filing for an emergency hearing on the board vote injunction this afternoon. He thinks he can get a temporary hold within 24 to 48 hours, given the criminal investigation. She paused. He also said something interesting. What? He said that 2 days ago someone from a law firm he didn't recognize called his office requesting information about my estate planning documents. She looked at Caleb steadily. He said they identified themselves as preparing for a potential competency review. Caleb felt the geometry of it settle into place. A competency review, he said. If I were declared legally incapacitated, not dead incapacitated, control of my affairs passes to a designated trustee structure, which the board can then petition to have aligned with their appointed leadership. Victoria's voice was flat. They had 2 plans, kill me or incapacitate me. The jump was Plan A. The competency review was Plan B. They were building both simultaneously, Caleb said, which means Plan B is still in motion, she said. Even with me standing here alive, they can still try to... She stopped. They'd need evidence of incapacity, Caleb said. Psychiatric evaluation, behavioral pattern documentation, something that creates a legal record. Or, Victoria said slowly, they'd need to manufacture it. How? She looked at him. What would happen if someone in my company, someone with access to my communications, started sending emails in my name that appeared erratic, missing meetings, making irrational statements, contradicting previous positions publicly? She paused. I have a company email, a public-facing social account, internal communication channels. If someone with system access started using them in ways designed to look like a person coming apart, how much access does Ashby have to your company systems? As a board member limited, but his people, she stopped. His people have spent 11 years inside my company. Some of them are my employees. Some of them are people I promoted. The weight of that hung between them. You have people you trust completely, Caleb said. Not many, but some. I need you to get them on the phone in the next 30 minutes and tell them to lock down your communication accounts. Change credentials. Alert your IT security team. Flag any outgoing communications from your accounts for manual review before they send. Victoria was already dialing. Caleb looked at the time. It was 12:17 in the afternoon. Emma's school day ended at 3:15. He had less than 3 hours before he needed to be at those gates, and there was police presence on site, and his sister in Tucson was waiting for a phone call she didn't know she was going to receive. I thought about his daughter sitting in her second-grade classroom right now, probably doing math, probably fidgeting the way she always fidgeted during math, because the numbers moved too slowly for her. He thought about her looking up at the door when he came to get her early, the way her face would change when she saw him, that particular specific joy that was the best thing in his life. He breathed. He made a decision. He turned and found Detective Okafor in the organized chaos of the crime scene. "I have information about a second element of the operation," he said. "Separate from the parachute. You need to hear it now." She looked at him and nodded. "Walk with me," she said. And as the Arizona afternoon settled into its full relentless heat around them, Caleb Dawson, who had once sworn to himself that he was done being the man who walked into the middle of other people's wars, walked forward because the war had come to him this time, and because Emma's face was in his mind, and because the only way out of something like this was through it. He had learned that lesson once before, in a place he never talked about. I was not going to need to learn it again. Detective Okafor walked fast. Caleb matched her pace without thinking about it, the way you match the pace of someone who knows where they're going and has already decided the conversation starts now, not after they arrive somewhere. "The competency review," Okafor said, not looking at him. "Walk me through it." Caleb laid it out. The law firm call to Victoria's attorney 2 days ago. The manufactured incapacity strategy, running parallel to the physical attempt. The access required to build a legal record of erratic behavior using Victoria's own communication systems. Okafor listened, wrote, asked one sharp question. Who at Hartwell Technologies would have the system access to impersonate her digitally? "That's what Victoria is trying to identify right now," Caleb said. "She's locking down her accounts, but the damage if they've already sent anything, already created a record that's already out there." Okafor stopped walking. She turned to face him directly. "Mr. Dawson, what you're describing is a 2-track operation. Physical elimination on track 1, legal incapacitation on track 2, both running simultaneously, coordinated with contingency logic built in." She paused. "In 16 years I've seen sophisticated organized crime operations with less planning than this." "I know, which raises a question I need to ask you directly." She held his gaze. "Is there anything about your own background, your time in special operations, whatever circumstances led to your separation, that connects you to the people behind this? Any prior relationship? Any shared history? Any reason they would have been watching you specifically before today?" Caleb felt the question land. He had been waiting for it. Not because he had anything to hide, but because it was the right question, and Okafor was smart enough to ask it. And smart people always eventually ask the right questions. "No direct connection," he said. "But the man who called me after the jump, the one who mentioned Emma, his voice, the accent, the cadence, the training underneath the control." He paused. "I've been in rooms with men who sound exactly like that. Not this specific man, but his category of man." "What category is that?" "The kind that governments use for things they don't acknowledge," Caleb said. "The kind that when the government is done with them finds private employment with people who have enough money to afford them." Okafor absorbed that. "You're saying whoever is behind this has access to that level of contractor. I'm saying the person who modified that rig, who stole Marcus Reeves's identity, with access to military records, who placed surveillance on my home. That's not a private investigator, and it's not a corporate security firm. That's a different class of operator. Which makes Richard Ashby more than just a corrupt board member," Okafor said. "Or makes whoever is really running this something that Ashby hired and then lost control of," Caleb said. "Because that happens too. You bring in something sharp to solve a problem, and it cuts in directions you didn't plan." Okafor was quiet for 3 seconds. "I need to make some calls," she said. "Federal calls. This is moving outside my lane, and I'd rather acknowledge that early than late." She looked at him. "Stay close. Don't leave the site. And if you receive any more contact from unknown numbers, answer record if you can, and call me the moment it ends." She handed him a card with her direct cell number written on the back in pen. The printed number was her office. The handwritten one was her. He understood the distinction. She walked away. It was 12:31. Victoria was still on her phone 20 feet away, speaking with the controlled urgency of someone managing 3 critical situations simultaneously, which was exactly what she was doing. Caleb watched her and thought about what Okafor had just said, that the operation had a sophistication beyond standard corporate wrongdoing. And he thought about Ashby, a name he still only knew as a name, and he thought about the voice on the phone, and what it would mean if that voice belonged to someone from a world that Caleb had left, but that had apparently not entirely left him. His phone buzzed. A text from an unsaved number. 4 words. "Check your truck now." He stood very still. Then he walked to the parking lot. His F-150 was where he'd left it, 3rd row nose in. He walked around it slowly, looking at the body, the undercarriage, the wheel wells. Nothing visible. He looked at the door seam on the driver's side. Nothing. He looked at the rear bumper. There was a small white envelope taped to the inside of the rear bumper, tucked up where it wouldn't catch the wind. He put on his inspection gloves, he still had them in his jacket pocket, never took them off during an inspection day, and peeled the envelope free. Inside was a single folded piece of paper. He unfolded it. It was a photograph. Printed on standard paper, not photo stock. Black and white. Slightly grainy like a screenshot from a security camera. It showed a man he didn't recognize entering a building. The man was carrying a hard-sided equipment case of the kind used to transport specialized tools. The image had a timestamp in the corner 2 days ago, 11:47 p.m. On the back of the photograph, handwritten in small, precise lettering. Ashby didn't plan this alone. Reeves works for Meridian. Meridian has 3 board members. You are looking at the wrong man. Caleb read it twice. Then he called Okafor. She arrived in 90 seconds. He showed her the envelope, the photograph, the note. He told her exactly where he'd found it, and exactly what the text message said. She bagged all of it without touching it directly. "Meridian," she said. "Mean anything to you?" "Not offhand. You?" "No," Caleb said. "But someone wants me to know about it. Someone who knows where I parked, who has my number, and who is not on the same side as the people who called me this morning." Okafor looked at him. "Someone inside their operation. Or adjacent to it. Someone who knows enough to give us this, but isn't positioned to come forward directly." Caleb looked at the bagged photograph. The timestamp is 2 days ago. The equipment case in the picture, that's the kind of case you'd use to transport parachute components, or modification tools. If we can identify the building in that image, the signage on the left edge, Caleb said, partially visible. I couldn't read it in the field, but your forensic people might be able to enhance it. She was already moving again. It was 12:48. Caleb walked back toward Victoria, and as he crossed the drop zone, he did what he always did when the situation became sufficiently complicated. He simplified it. He stripped away everything secondary and held only the essential geometry: who wanted what, who had what, who needed what, from whom, and what was the most direct path between the current state and the desired outcome. The desired outcome was Emma safe in a yellow bedroom in Tucson. The path to that ran through everything that had to happen first. Victoria met him halfway. "I found something," she said. Her face was tight. "My IT director, Priya, she's been with me 8 years. I trust her completely. She ran a communications audit on my accounts going back 90 days. She paused. "There are 14 emails sent from my account that I did not write." "When did they start?" "The first one was sent 63 days ago," Victoria said. "Small things at first, canceling meetings without explanation, short curt responses to partners I normally respond to warmly. Then more specific contradicting positions I'd taken publicly, making statements about the acquisition that don't align with my actual strategy." She stopped. "And then last week, an email to 3 board members suggesting I was considering stepping back from day-to-day operations due to personal health concerns." The architecture of it was complete now. Caleb could see the whole shape. "They've been building this for 2 months," he said. "The parachute today was the end of the timeline, not the beginning. If the jump succeeded, they had a dead CEO. If it didn't succeed, they had 60 days of documented erratic behavior to take to a court and argue incapacity. "Either way, I'm out," Victoria said. "Either way, the vote goes how they need it to go." She looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her yet. Not composure, not executive focus, not the particular controlled anger she'd been operating on since the drop zone. This was something older and tireder. The expression of a person who has been fighting for a long time and has just understood how much longer the fight goes. "How do you do it?" she said. "Do what?" "Stay like this, stay present. My hands are shaking." She looked at her own hands. They were. Slightly, barely perceptibly, but they were. "I am standing on a drop zone in Arizona, and my company is being dismantled in real time, and someone tried to kill me this morning and I—" She stopped. "How are you not falling apart?" Caleb thought about it. The honest answer. "I fell apart once," he said. "After the military, after the separation. I went through about 18 months where falling apart was my full-time occupation." He looked at her. "And then one morning, Emma climbed into my bed at 6 in the morning because she'd had a bad dream, and she fell back asleep in about 30 seconds, and I laid there and watched her breathe, and I thought, this is the thing, right here. This is the thing I don't let go of." He paused. "After that, everything else became a problem to solve instead of a weight to carry." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "She's lucky," she said. "I'm the lucky one," he said. A moment passed between them that was quiet and genuine, and then Caleb said, "The emails. Priya, can she prove they came from inside the system rather than from you?" "She's working on that now. The IP addresses are routing through a VPN, but she thinks she can trace the origination point." Victoria's voice shifted back to operational. "She said she needs 2 hours. She has less than that before Ashby's people know we've found it and start covering their tracks," Caleb said. "Call her back. Tell her she has 45 minutes. Victoria called. While she talked, Caleb's phone rang. The screen showed Jamie's name. "Talk to me," Caleb said. "Caleb." Jamie was whispering, which meant he was somewhere he didn't want to be overheard. One of the forensic guys just walked out of the equipment room carrying Unit 7 in an evidence bag. And one of the Skyline executives, Mr. Carver, the regional VP, he's been trying to get in there for the last 30 minutes. The police keep blocking him. He's angry. Like really angry. "Good," Caleb said. "Let him be angry. That's important data." "There's something else," Jamie said. "You know how I told you I documented the access log for the equipment room, the paper log, the one by the door?" "Yes." "Someone removed it." Caleb went still. "When?" "I don't know exactly. I went back to photograph it again for the detective and it's gone. The holder on the wall is empty." "Did you photograph it the first time when you did the initial documentation?" A pause that lasted 2 seconds and felt like 10. "Yes," Jamie said. "I photographed it at 9:15 this morning. It shows 3 access entries before the jump." "Jamie." Caleb kept his voice completely steady. "I need you to do something critical right now. I need you to go directly to Detective Okafor, not to any Skyline staff, not to Carver, directly to Okafor, and show her that photograph. Right now. Don't stop for anything." "Should I tell her about the access log being removed?" "Yes. Everything. Go now." He hung up. The access log removal meant someone inside the current crime scene perimeter had just destroyed or taken evidence. Which meant Caleb and Okafor had a problem. They hadn't accounted for someone with enough freedom of movement inside the secured site to walk into the equipment room and remove a physical document while police were present. Someone in uniform. Or someone who looked like they were in uniform. He turned and his eyes swept the perimeter of the drop zone, the way they had been doing since the jump, in the specific pattern that covered maximum visual area in minimum time. A habit. So ingrained it happened below conscious decision. He was looking for someone who was trying not to be looked at. Someone whose body language had the particular quality of performed casualness. He found it. East edge of the perimeter. A man in what appeared to be an Arizona County Sheriff's auxiliary jacket, standing with his back partly toward Caleb, apparently looking at his phone. Too still for someone genuinely looking at their phone. The stillness of someone listening to what was happening around them. Caleb didn't move toward him. He found Okafor first. She was 20 feet away dealing with Jamie, who had appeared and was already showing her his phone. Good kid. Caleb reached Okafor's elbow and leaned in. East Edge. Man in auxiliary jacket. He's watching, not participating. I don't recognize him from the pre-event staff roster, and I looked at that roster twice this morning. Okafor glanced east without appearing to. 1 second. Then she spoke quietly to the uniformed officer beside her, who moved in that direction with the casual efficiency of someone who had done this before. Caleb watched. The auxiliary-jacketed man saw the officer move and made a decision in under 2 seconds, the specific decision of someone whose contingency plan just activated. He turned and walked toward the parking lot with the fast but not running pace of someone who knew that running was worse than walking. The officer accelerated. 2 more officers converged. The man stopped walking. He was taken into temporary custody for questioning at 1:09 in the afternoon. Okafor was beside Caleb. The access log, Caleb said. Jamie's photograph shows it clearly. 3 entries before the jump. One of them has a badge number that our system shows was deactivated 6 months ago. She paused. Someone used a dead credential to access the equipment room. Which means they had someone inside Skyline who kept a deactivated credential active in the system without flagging it for deactivation. Yes. How deep does this go inside Skyline? Caleb said. That is a question I am very actively pursuing, Okafor said. And one that just became a question for the FBI as well. She looked at him. I made my federal calls. They're sending 2 agents from the Phoenix field office. ETA approximately 90 minutes. FBI. Caleb had worked with federal agents before, in circumstances that couldn't be fully described in a parking lot conversation. He knew what their arrival meant. More resources, longer timeline, and the particular jurisdictional complexity of 2 agencies trying to be cooperative while each protecting its own lane. 90 minutes is a long time, he said. I know. Victoria's IT director has 45 minutes before their traces get covered. I know that too. Okafor looked at him. Here's where I am. I have a crime scene that is actively being interfered with. I have at least 2 subjects who have fled. I have a 3rd in temporary custody who will lawyer up in about 4 minutes. I have physical evidence, the rig your photographs. Jamie's documentation that is solid. And I have a corporate conspiracy with fingers inside at least 3 organizations that I can currently identify. She paused. What I need from you right now is everything you know about the man whose voice you heard on the phone. Anything. Any detail that could help identify him. Caleb thought. The accent, he said. I said Eastern European before. I want to revise that. It was Eastern European trained out, meaning he learned to speak without it mostly. But under controlled affect when he was being deliberate and threatening certain sounds came back. He paused. Russian originally, or a former Soviet state. But he's been working in English for a long time. 15 years minimum. His idiom was natural, he said, nobody needs to know you were here today. And that's a native construction, not a translation. Okafor was writing fast. Physical voice, she said. Mid-range baritone. No vocal fry. Very controlled breathing, the kind you train, not the kind that happens naturally. He was monitoring his own affect while he spoke, which means he's done this kind of call before. Caleb paused. He mentioned Emma's sandwich, a detail he could only have from surveillance footage or direct visual observation of my house this morning between 6 and 7 a.m. That's a narrow window. He was either there himself, or he had someone positioned there who relayed it. We'll pull any traffic or residential security camera footage near your address for that window, Okafor said. My neighbor across the street has a doorbell camera, Caleb said. Mr. Patterson. He's retired. He's home during the day. He checks that camera, the way other people check social media. He'll have footage. I'll send someone. She moved away again. It was 1:22. Caleb stood in the middle of the organized chaos and did what he'd been doing all day. He held the still center of it. He thought about the note from his truck. Meridian. 3 board members. You are looking at the wrong man. Which meant someone inside the operation, or close enough to see it, was trying to redirect the investigation. Was trying to tell them that Ashby was either a front, a distraction, or a man who had been used without knowing the full picture, or it was disinformation, placed by the same people who'd called him to redirect law enforcement away from Ashby right when they were closing in. He needed more information. He walked to Victoria. She'd finished her call with Priya. Something in her posture told him the news before she spoke. Priya found the origination point, Victoria said. The 14 emails, they came from inside our building, from a workstation on the 14th floor. She paused. Executive suite, my floor. Another pause. The workstation belongs to my personal assistant. Caleb let that settle. How long has your assistant been with you? He said. 4 years, Victoria said. And for a moment, just a moment, the executive armor cracked slightly. Not collapse. Just the flinch of someone who had just learned that proximity doesn't equal loyalty, which was a lesson that never stopped costing something, even when you'd already learned it. Does your assistant know Ashby? They interact regularly. Ashby's people go through my assistant for scheduling. She stopped. Oh God, scheduling. What? The charity event today, the assignment of equipment. Who was assigned which rig? She looked at Caleb. My assistant managed the coordination between the Foundation and Skyline. They would have known exactly which rig was Unit 7 and exactly whose name was on the manifest card. The last piece. The access. The knowledge. The placement. It all ran through one person who sat outside Victoria's office. His office 4 years and had apparently been using that proximity for at least 60 days and possibly longer. Where is your assistant right now? Caleb said. At the office. We're not... She pulled out her phone. Dialed. Waited. No answer. Dialed again. No answer. She looked at Caleb. Call the office main desk, he said. Ask if they're in the building. She called. Asked. Listened. They called in sick this morning, she said, before the event started. Of course. Positioned to be absent during the event. Absent on record, with a reason with no physical presence at the scene. Clean. Caleb said, Tell Priya to lock that workstation remotely right now. Don't let anyone access it. That machine is evidence. Victoria relayed it. And tell her not to inform anyone else in the building, Caleb added. Not until law enforcement can secure the device physically. While Victoria spoke, Caleb's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Different number than the previous ones. 4 digits different. Not the voice. Someone else. The text said, Meridian is a private intelligence firm, incorporated in Delaware, operating internationally. Ashby is a client. He is not the principal. The principal is on the board. Caleb stared at it. He called Okafor. She read the text over his shoulder. The principal is on the board, she said slowly. Not Ashby. Someone above Ashby. Someone who used Ashby as the visible hand, Caleb said, so that if anything went wrong, Ashby takes the exposure. And Ashby might not even know he's been set up to take it, Okafor said. Or he knows and accepted the risk because the reward was large enough, Caleb said. Either way, we need to know who else sits on that board, and which of them has a relationship with a Delaware incorporated private intelligence firm called Meridian. Okafor took a photograph of the text and was already moving. It was 1:47. Caleb realized he had been on this drop zone for 3 hours and 14 minutes. He had eaten nothing since the peanut butter sandwich he'd given Emma this morning, which he'd never actually eaten. Had he? He'd put it in his pocket for her, and then events had overtaken it, and it was presumably still somewhere in his jacket. He checked. It was there. Flat and warm and slightly structural now from being in his pocket through a skydiving rescue and a criminal investigation, but technically still a sandwich. He ate it standing up, watching the drop zone, because his body needed fuel, and this was the fuel available. I was halfway through it when Victoria appeared beside him and looked at what he was doing. Did you just eat a peanut butter sandwich in the middle of all of this? She said. Emma made it, he said. She looked at him. Then despite everything, despite the morning, the fall, the conspiracy, the emails, the fled suspects, the FBI en route, she almost smiled. You're a strange man, Caleb Dawson, she said. I've been told that, he said. The moment lasted exactly as long as it was allowed to last before his phone rang and everything accelerated again. It was Okafor. "We have an ID on this man in the auxiliary jacket," she said. Her voice was different, faster. Something had shifted in the last 20 minutes. He had a credential in the name of a county auxiliary position that doesn't exist, but his biometrics matched a federal database record. She paused for exactly one beat. His real name is Anton Vasilyev. He's a former FSB contractor, Russian Federal Security Service, who dropped off official record approximately 8 years ago. He's been linked circumstantially, never prosecuted, to 3 private intelligence operations in the last 4 years, 2 in Europe, 1 in South America. Caleb stood very still. "Meridian," he said. "We think so," Okafor said. "The FBI agents are pushing up their arrival. They're now 60 minutes out." Another pause. "Caleb, this has moved significantly past a corporate conspiracy. What you're looking at is an operation involving a private intelligence contractor with foreign origins targeting a U.S. technology company." She paused. "Which means the question of why Hartwell Technologies? Why this acquisition has an answer that might be significantly larger than a board vote and a 9-figure payout." Caleb said, "What does Hartwell Technologies' acquisition target do?" He heard Okafor's breath change on the other end. "I don't know," she said. "Do you?" He turned and looked at Victoria across the drop zone. He walked to her. "The acquisition you've been building for 2 years," he said. "The one that fails if you're gone. What does the company do?" Victoria looked at him with the expression of someone who is about to say something they have not yet said out loud to law enforcement and understands the weight of saying it. "It's a semiconductor firm," she said. "Advanced processing components, the kind used in defense applications." She met his eyes. "The kind that 3 foreign governments have been trying to acquire U.S.-based access to for the past decade." The still center. Caleb breathed. "This was never just about the board vote," he said. "No," Victoria said quietly. "I don't think it was." The Arizona sky was full and hard and blue above them, the same sky. He'd fallen through 5 hours ago, and the world was considerably larger and more complicated than it had been when he'd parked his truck this morning and walked into a hangar with a smashed sandwich in his pocket. Emma was 3 blocks away from 2 police cruisers. He had 58 minutes before the FBI arrived, and somewhere out there, in the clean, organized distance of men who worked in shadows and used other people's names and flew in and out of situations like this without leaving fingerprints, someone was making calculations. Caleb had spent his life being in rooms where those calculations were made. He knew what came next. He also knew that the person making those calculations had made one significant error at the beginning of this day. They had looked at a quiet father in a modest job with a cracked taillight and a 7-year-old daughter, and they had decided he was someone who could be managed. They were wrong. And in the next 48 hours, that error was going to cost them everything. The FBI agents arrived at 2:43 in the afternoon. 2 of them. Special Agent Dana Reyes, 40, with the particular economy of motion that Caleb associated with people who had done field work for a long time and had burned away everything unnecessary. Her partner, Special Agent Tom Bricker, mid-30s, quieter. The kind of quiet that was listening rather than absence. They came in a dark SUV, and they moved through the site with the specific authority of people who had just taken the ceiling off the jurisdiction. Okafor met them at the perimeter. Caleb watched the handoff from 20 feet away, the brief, efficient transfer of information between professionals who respected each other's lanes. It took 4 minutes. Then Reyes looked across the drop zone and found Caleb with her eyes the way people trained in threat assessment find the most relevant person in a crowd without appearing to look for them. She walked to him directly. "Mr. Dawson," she said. "I've read Detective Okafor's summary. I have some additional questions." "I expected that," he said. "Your military record," she said. "Some of it is accessible, some of it is not. The parts that aren't, I have clearance to know about them if you choose to read me in." Caleb looked at her. "Unit designation," he said. She told him a number, a specific number. Not a name, not an acronym, Just a number that meant something to exactly the kind of people who had served in exactly the kind of places Caleb had served. He nodded once. "Then you know why I don't lead with that information in general conversation." "I do," she said. "And I'm not asking you to. I'm asking because the name Anton Vasiliev, the firm called Meridian, and the involvement of advanced semiconductor acquisition. Those three elements together put this in a category that my division has been tracking for approximately 14 months. She held his gaze. "You didn't walk into a corporate conspiracy today, Mr. Dawson. You walked into the edge of an active federal counterintelligence operation." The stillness in Caleb's chest expanded. "Meridian is known to you," he said. "Meridian is known to us," Reyes said. "They operate as a legitimate private intelligence and security consulting firm. Delaware Incorporation International Offices, entirely legal surface. Below the surface." She paused. "They act as a cutout, a buffer between foreign state intelligence services and domestic targets. They provide deniability. The foreign principals never touch U.S. soil directly. Meridian handles acquisition pressure elimination when required." "Elimination," Caleb said. "3 incidents in the past 14 months, Reyes said. 2 attributed to accident, 1 attributed to natural causes. In each case, the target had a connection to advanced technology with defense applications. In each case, someone with a Meridian connection was present in the weeks before the incident." She paused. "Victoria Hartwell was on our radar as a potential target for approximately 6 weeks. We were still building the picture. We were not fast enough." Caleb absorbed that. "She was almost killed this morning," he said. "I know," Reyes said. And something in her voice, brief, genuine, not performed, acknowledged the weight of that. The operation today was more overt than their previous actions, which tells us either the timeline accelerated beyond their comfort zone, or someone made a decision to accept more risk, because the acquisition opportunity was too significant to allow another approach. "The board vote," Caleb said. 6 days. If Hartwell Technologies acquires the semiconductor firm under Victoria's leadership, that acquisition goes through standard CFI-US review and almost certainly gets approved. The technology stays domestic. Reyes looked at him steadily. "If Victoria is gone and the board restructures under Ashby's aligned leadership, the acquisition target becomes available for a competing bid from a holding company that Meridian has spent 18 months positioning. That holding company traces back through 4 corporate layers to a state-owned investment fund. Foreign acquisition of domestic defense, adjacent semiconductor technology," Caleb said. "Through a mechanism that would survive initial regulatory scrutiny because the holding company is incorporated domestically, and the foreign connection requires significant forensic accounting to establish." Reyes paused. "It's sophisticated. It took our team 4 months to trace it. And it required Hartwell to be either dead or legally incapacitated to work." Caleb thought about the note from his truck. The text messages. The deliberate redirects toward Meridian, away from Ashby. "Someone inside the operation is feeding us information," he said. "Anonymous notes texts pointing us at Meridian and saying Ashby isn't the principal." Reyes nodded. "We know. We have a source. I can't tell you who. But the information you've received today is consistent with what they've been providing us." "Then your source is trying to accelerate this. They're using me as a channel because they couldn't move fast enough through official channels." "That is an accurate assessment," Reyes said. "The source believes the 6-day timeline creates an irreversible window. If we don't move before the board vote, if Ashby's people succeed in using Victoria's documented erratic behavior and the chaos from today to push an emergency board action, the acquisition deal collapses, the competing bid activates, and Meridian gets what they came for, even without killing anyone." "So even with Victoria alive," Caleb said, "they can still win, unless we stop the board action and destroy the fabricated evidence of her incapacity," Reyes said. "Both, in the next 5 days." Caleb looked across the drop zone to where Victoria stood with Bricker talking rapidly, her hands moving with the energy of someone who was fighting on every front simultaneously and refusing to stop. "Tell me what you need from me," he said. Reyes studied him for a moment. "You have a relationship with Victoria that was established under extreme circumstances today. That kind of trust, the kind you build when someone saves your life. It's real in a way that no professional relationship replicates quickly. She paused. I need you to stay close to her. Not as law enforcement. Not officially. As the person she already trusts. Because the next 5 days are going to involve people trying to get to her through every channel available. And she needs someone in her immediate orbit who is not on anyone's payroll and who has demonstrated they can read a situation correctly under pressure. I have a daughter, Caleb said. I know. She's covered. Riverside Elementary has discreet protection, and your sister in Tucson has been identified as a viable secondary location. She met his eyes. Emma is safe, Mr. Dawson. I promise you that is the first thing we secured. He held her gaze for a moment, testing it, measuring it, the same way he'd measured Okafor's word earlier. He believed her. What's the immediate next step? He said. We secure the workstation in Victoria's office before anyone gets to it. I have an agent moving on that right now. She checked her watch. We formally detain Vasiliev, who is currently in temporary custody before his lawyers arrive and complicate that picture. And we bring Victoria in for a full briefing. Everything we know about Meridian, the foreign connection, the scope of the operation, because she has a right to understand what she's been standing in the middle of. She's going to want to fight back, Caleb said. Good, Reyes said, because fighting back is exactly what I need her to do. It was 3:01. They moved. The next 4 hours were the most operationally dense of the day, which was a statement that included the morning's jump. Reyes moved with the precision of someone executing a plan that had been partially constructed and was now being finished in real time. She was on 3 phones simultaneously. She coordinated with Okafor without friction. The jurisdictional handoff happened cleanly, each woman understanding exactly where her authority ended and the others began, which Caleb noted as exceptional because in his experience, that kind of interagency clarity was rarer than it should be. At 3:15, Anton Vasiliev was formally arrested on charges that Reyes would not detail to Caleb specifically, but that clearly went well beyond trespassing on a crime scene. At 3:28, Jamie called. The Skyline Regional VP Carver just left the building, Jamie said. He told the remaining staff he was going to handle the liability situation personally. He took a bag, like a full bag. Caleb. Which direction? He left in his car, north on the access road. Caleb relayed it to Reyes. She made one call. 40 seconds later, she said, we have people on him. At 3:44, Victoria's IT director, Priya, sent a data package to Reyes's secure email. The forensic trace of the 14 fabricated emails with the origination metadata, intact, and a chain of authentication that an expert witness could present in court. Victoria was in a temporary command space, a corner of the Skyline office building that Okafor had commandeered when the confirmation came through. She read the summary on Reyes's tablet and set it down and was quiet for exactly 5 seconds. 4 years, she said. She sat outside my office for 4 years. Nobody said anything because there was nothing useful to say. What's her name? Caleb said. Your assistant. What's her actual name? Lauren, Victoria said. Lauren Moss. She said it like she was testing the weight of it, like she was deciding whether to be angry or sad, and finding that it was both fully and simultaneously without one diminishing the other. Did you like her? Caleb said. Victoria looked at him, slightly surprised by the question. Yes, she said quietly. I did. I trusted her with things I didn't trust most people with. She paused. That's probably why they chose her. Or chose her and then turned her, Caleb said. It's not always recruitment from outside. Sometimes it's finding someone who's already inside and identifying the pressure point. Victoria looked at him. What pressure point? I don't know yet, but there's always one. Nobody does this because they think it's right. They do it because someone found the thing they couldn't say no to. I wasn't making excuses for Lauren Moss. He wasn't even asking Victoria to. He was just being accurate because in his experience, inaccuracy about human motivation was how investigations went sideways. Victoria nodded slowly. I'd like to know, she said. Whatever it was, I'd like to understand it. You will, he said. At 4:09, Reyes received a call that changed the pace of everything. She stepped away. She came back 2 minutes later, and she looked at Caleb with a specific expression. The expression of someone who has just received information that confirms something they suspected but had not yet been able to establish. "Vasiliev is talking," she said. Caleb stared at her. "Already. He made one call after arrest. His lawyers aren't here yet. Whatever that call was, it appears to have conveyed to him that he should not wait for legal representation before making decisions about cooperation." She paused. "He's naming the Meridian principal who contracted this operation, and the board member." "Who?" Victoria said. Reyes looked at her. "A man named Stuart Park. He's been on your board for 7 years. He chairs the Technology Acquisition Committee." Victoria sat very still. Caleb watched her face. Stuart Park was not Ashby. The whole day they had been focused on Richard Ashby, the board antagonist, the man who stood to benefit most visibly from Victoria's removal, the man whose name had come up first and stayed up. And the notes the anonymous redirects those had been trying to tell them wrong. "Man, wrong man, look deeper." "Park chairs the acquisition committee," Caleb said to Victoria. "He would have had oversight of the competing bid. He would have had the authority to steer board attention toward or away from acquisition targets," Victoria said. Her voice was very controlled. "He was the one who kept raising due diligence concerns about my acquisition, the one who kept requesting delays." She stopped. "He was slowing me down, giving Meridian's positioning time to solidify, and using Ashby as the visible opposition," Caleb said. "Ashby's the face everyone watches. Park is the mechanism." "Does Ashby know?" Victoria said. "We'll find out," Reyes said. "But my initial read Vasiliev is specifically naming Park, not Ashby, which suggests Ashby may have been a participant without being read into the full scope of the operation." "He still participated," Victoria said, and there was steel in her voice. "Yes," Reyes said. "He still participated." It was 4:33. Caleb's phone buzzed. His sister Claire in Tucson. He stepped outside and answered. "Caleb." Claire's voice was warm and unshaken, which was one of the best things about his sister. She had the particular steadiness of someone who had raised 3 kids and run a small business and survived a divorce and come out the other side, still fundamentally herself. "I don't know what's going on exactly, and you don't have to tell me. But I just want you to know, Emma is here. She thinks this is a surprise adventure. She has already named my dog, something new without asking, and she is absolutely fine." Caleb closed his eyes. "Thank you," he said. "She made me a sandwich," Claire said. "Peanut butter. She said you like them." He laughed. Actually laughed. Short and sudden and real, the kind that arrives without permission. "I do," he said. "Caleb." Claire's voice dropped slightly. "Are you okay?" I thought about the honest answer. He thought about 11,000 feet and 9 seconds, and Anton Vasiliev, and Stuart Park, and Meridian, and semiconductor firms, and foreign state intelligence services, and the photograph in his truck, and all of it, the whole enormous, complicated, dangerous day. "I'm working on it," he said. "Okay," she said. "Emma asks if you're coming tonight." "Tell her yes," he said. "Tell her absolutely yes." He hung up and stood outside for 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds of not being in the middle of it. 30 seconds of being a father whose daughter had named his sister's dog something new without asking. Then he went back inside. Because the next 4 days were going to require everything he had. Stuart Park was taken into federal custody at 6:17 that evening at the airport. Phoenix Sky Harbor Gate, B-14 boarding a flight to Zurich. He had a carry-on bag and a first-class ticket, and the particular composure of a man who believed until the last moment that his paperwork was in order. It was not in order. Reyes had moved on the airport with 2 hours to spare, and had spent those 2 hours ensuring that every exit was covered and every piece of documentation was prepared. Park's arrest was clean, legal, and airtight, which was the only kind that held up when the lawyers arrived, and Park's lawyers arrived approximately 45 minutes after he did. Caleb was not at the airport. He was with Victoria in the Skyline conference room that had become their operational base, watching the confirmation come through on Reyes's text. Victoria read it. She set the phone down. She sat with her hands flat on the table for a moment. Then she said, 7 years. He sat on my board for 7 years. He may have been positioned from the beginning, Caleb said. Or he may have been turned at a specific point when Meridian identified the acquisition as a target. We'll know more as Vasiliev's information is processed. It doesn't matter which, she said. He was in the room for 7 years. He voted on strategy. He asked questions in meetings that I thought were due diligence and were actually intelligence gathering. She looked at her hands. How much did they get? How much of what I thought was protected was actually... That's a question for the counterintelligence team, Caleb said. And for your security people. It's going to take time to assess the full scope of the exposure. But the acquisition, she said. My acquisition, the semiconductor firm. Is it still yours? Caleb said. Park is arrested. The competing bid loses its board support. And with a federal counterintelligence investigation open, any competing bid connected to Meridian's network is going to face scrutiny that kills it. He held her eyes. You protected the acquisition by staying alive today. She was quiet for a moment. By staying alive, she repeated. That's a strange way to describe corporate strategy. Today was a strange day, he said. She looked at him, then really looked at him the way she had on the drop zone 7 hours ago when she'd asked, Who are you? Except this time she already knew part of the answer and was looking at the rest. What happens to you now? She said. I thought about it. I go to Tucson and get my daughter. I drive back to Phoenix. I fix the taillight on my truck. I go to work Monday if I still have a job, which is somewhat unclear, given that I performed an unauthorized jump during a client event. You'll have a job, she said immediately. Victoria. I own the company that hired Skyline. I will have a conversation with appropriate people. She said it without drama as a simple fact. You will have a job. He nodded. And beyond that, she said. He didn't answer immediately. The truth was that he didn't fully know yet, because the quiet life, the deliberately small life he had built around Emma and soccer practice, and weekends at the Reptile Museum had been constructed specifically to keep this kind of day from happening. And it had happened anyway. And the people who had caused it had looked at his quiet life and used it as a reason to believe he was manageable, and they had been wrong. And the wrongness of their assessment had saved Victoria Hartwell's life, which meant something about the quiet life that he was still working out. I don't know, he said. Honest. She nodded. That's a fair answer. She paused. For what it's worth, whatever you decide comes next. You are not the person who gets overlooked anymore. Not by me. Not after today. That's a kind thing to say, he said. It's a true thing, she said. There's a difference. He almost smiled. That's exactly what I said to you about being calm versus controlled. She did smile then, brief and real. At 7:45, Reyes called Caleb in for a final briefing that would, she said, need to be followed by a much more extended debrief in the coming days. She was straightforward about what came next. Federal testimony. Potentially a hearing coordination with the counterintelligence team on the full scope of Meridian's domestic operations. His name was in the evidence chain, now his photographs, his report, his actions on the aircraft, and that meant a degree of visibility he hadn't had this morning and couldn't fully undo. Are you prepared for that? Reyes asked. He thought about it. I spent years working hard to be someone nobody noticed, he said. I built my whole life around that. And then this morning I jumped out of a plane and... He paused. I think the answer to your question is no. I'm not prepared for it, but I'm going to do it anyway. Because that's what you do when you're the person who was in the right place at the right time, and you made the choice to matter. Reyes looked at him for a moment. The unit number I gave you earlier, she said quietly. The designation. I want you to know that I've worked alongside people from that program. I know what that service cost, and what it asked, and what it took from people who gave it. She paused. What you did today, the inspection, the report, the jump, every decision after that, was the same work. Different context, same thing. He didn't respond because there wasn't a response that would have added to it. "Go get your daughter," she said. He did. The drive to Tucson took 2 hours and 17 minutes. Caleb drove in something that wasn't quite silence. The radio was on low. Something country, out of a Flagstaff station, that he wasn't really hearing, and he let the day process through him the way long days always processed, not all at once, but in pieces arriving and being acknowledged and set down. He thought about Victoria, who was currently in a secure hotel under federal protection, working her phone calling the board members she trusted, beginning the process of reclaiming a company that 7 years of infiltration had been quietly hollowing. He thought about Reyes, who was still working, would probably work through the night. He thought about Okafor, who had given the case over with class and competence, and who deserved more credit than she would probably receive. He thought about Jamie, 26 years old, who had photographed an access log because someone he respected asked him to, and had no idea in the moment how much it would matter. I thought about the man with the flat voice and the Russian accent who had mentioned Emma's sandwich. He thought about Stuart Park in federal custody, and the lawyers who were probably already building arguments. I thought about Meridian, and how Reyes's team had been tracking it for 14 months, and would track it for however many more months it took, and how the nature of what Meridian was meant, that this was not the last time something like today would happen somewhere in the country to someone who didn't see it coming. He drove. At 9:02 he pulled into Claire's driveway. The porch light was on. Through the front window he could see the blue flicker of a television. He sat in the truck for a moment with the engine off. Just a moment. Long enough to move the day from inside him to behind him, the way you have to do before you walk into a room with your 7-year-old daughter. He knocked. Claire opened the door. She looked at him with the eyes of an older sister who can read her brother's face without him saying a single word, who has known him since he was 3 years old, and who understands the difference between fine and okay and here but processing. She put her hand on his arm. Didn't say anything. Just that. He nodded. Then a sound came from the hallway. Small feet on hardwood accelerating, and Emma appeared at a full sprint, hair loose and wild, because she'd clearly not let Claire near it since arriving wearing pajamas that had small dinosaurs on them, and the expression of a child who has been waiting for exactly this. She hit him at full speed. He caught her and picked her up in one motion, and she wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her face into his shoulder, and she said muffled, "Dad, Claire's dog's name is Biscuit now. I renamed him. He likes it." "I'm sure he does," Caleb said. "I made you a sandwich," she said. "It's in the fridge. I used extra peanut butter because you like it." "I know I do," he said. She pulled back and looked at him with the particular examination of a 7-year-old who is checking whether the important person in their life is genuinely okay or just performing okay. And he let her look because she deserved the real information. Whatever she saw, it satisfied her. She put her head back on his shoulder. "Are we staying?" she said. "Tonight," he said. "And maybe a couple more days." "Can we see the lizards?" He had forgotten for the first time in many weeks about the reptile museum in Tucson that she had been asking about for 2 months. "Yes," he said. "We can see the lizards." She made a small sound of satisfaction and tightened her arms around his neck. He stood in his sister's doorway with his daughter in his arms and the whole complicated day behind him, and for the first time since 7:43 that morning, since he'd walked into a hangar with a smashed sandwich in his pocket and a clipboard in his hand, and nobody in the room paying attention to him, he breathed completely. 3 days later, the Hartwell Technologies Board convened an emergency session. Richard Ashby did not attend. He had retained counsel and was cooperating selectively with federal investigators in a way that suggested he understood the difference between an accessory who cooperated early and a principal who fought everything. That distinction would matter in sentencing. Stuart Park's lawyers were fighting everything, which was their professional obligation, and also Caleb suspected a strategy that would not serve Park particularly well, given the weight of evidence Reyes's team had assembled. Kevin Garrett was found in Scottsdale at a hotel registered under a name that was not his. He was taken into custody without incident, which Caleb noted without satisfaction, but also without surprise. Men like Garrett generally didn't fight at the end. They fought when they still had options. When the options closed, they stopped. Lauren Moss, Victoria's assistant of 4 years, was located 2 days after the event at her mother's home in Denver. She surrendered to federal agents voluntarily. In her initial statement, she told investigators that Meridian had approached her 14 months ago with information about a financial situation in her family that she had never disclosed to Victoria. Medical debt. A significant amount. Her younger brother. The kind of thing that arrives suddenly and grows faster than any salary can address. Meridian had paid it. And then Meridian had owned her. Caleb heard this through Reyes and thought about what he'd told Victoria on the drop zone. There's always a pressure point, and felt nothing satisfying about being right. The board meeting lasted 4 hours. Victoria spoke for 90 minutes of it. She presented the counterintelligence investigation, the fabricated emails, the forensic evidence of digital impersonation, the full scope of what had been done to her company and why. She spoke without theatrics, without anger, with the precise controlled authority of someone who had spent 4 days absorbing an extraordinary amount of information and organizing it into something a room full of people could follow. 3 board members, who had been aligned with Ashby's position, changed their votes before the session ended. Not because they were altruistic, because the evidence made the political calculation clear. The restructuring proposal was defeated 14-2. The acquisition proceeded. Caleb was not at the board meeting. He was at Riverside Elementary, in the pickup line in his F-150 with the cracked taillight that he had still not fixed, listening to the same country station from Flagstaff and waiting for the doors to open. When they did, and the children streamed out, and Emma appeared in the doorway with her backpack on backwards, the way she always wore it, and her soccer jersey on over her school shirt, because she'd had practice that afternoon when she found him in the line, and her face did the thing. It always did. The specific, unguarded joy of a child who loves their person and sees them. He thought this is the calculation. Not the board meeting. Not the semiconductor acquisition, or the counterintelligence operation, or the charges that would work through courts for the next 2 years. Those things mattered. They were real. But the calculation that had actually governed every decision he'd made since 7:43 in the morning 4 days ago was standing right there with her backpack on backwards. She got in the truck. "How was practice?" he said. "I scored 2 goals, she said. "Coach Davis says I have natural instincts." "He's right," Caleb said. She buckled herself in and looked at him. "Are things okay now with the work stuff?" He had told her very little in the careful language parents use with 7-year-olds who are sharp enough to know something happened, and young enough to need the simplified version. He'd told her there was a complicated situation at work, and they'd spent some days at Aunt Claire's because of it, and now it was getting sorted out. "Getting sorted," he said. "Getting better." She accepted this with the trust that was the most valuable thing in his life. "Reptile Museum this weekend," she said. "Reptile Museum this weekend," he said. She nodded decisively. "Good." He pulled out of the pickup line and drove. 2 weeks after the drop zone, Victoria Hartwell called him. Not a text. An actual call which he answered on the second ring, sitting at his kitchen table, after Emma was in bed with a cup of coffee that had gone slightly cold. "The acquisition closed," she said. "Formally, this morning." "Congratulations," he said. "Thank you." A pause. "I want to offer you something, and I want you to know you can say no without it changing anything between us." "Okay," he said. "I'm building an internal security and safety oversight function," she said. "Not a standard corporate security team, something different. People who actually understand how risk works from the inside, not how it looks on paper, but how it feels when someone has altered something in a way that's designed to survive casual inspection." She paused. "I'd like you to lead it." Caleb was quiet. "That's a significant offer," he said. "It's a significant role, and you'd be compensated accordingly. But more than that." Voice shifted slightly, the way it did when she was being careful about something that mattered to her personally. "I've spent 10 years building something with people I thought I could trust, and I learned 4 days ago that trust without verification is a liability. I need someone who understands both sides of that. Who knows how the deception works because they've been trained in the environment where those skills are built. She paused. I know you built a quiet life for good reasons. I'm not asking you to abandon that. Emma still gets her soccer and her reptile museum. I'm asking you to consider whether the quiet life and the purposeful life have to be the same thing. He sat with that for a long moment. He thought about the hangar, the inspection, the moment he had turned the rig over in his hands and felt the wrongness of it, and decided to follow that feeling through to wherever it led. He thought about Reyes saying what you did today was the same work. Different context, same thing. He thought about being the man nobody noticed, and he thought about what it had cost not to him in the end, but to everyone around him to be that man when the situation required someone different. I'll need to think about it, he said. Take whatever time you need, she said. And Emma's schedule is non-negotiable, he said. Completely understood, she said. And he could hear in her voice that she meant it precisely without qualification. Then I'll think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking, she said. After he hung up, he sat for a while with the cold coffee and the quiet house and the sound of Emma sleeping down the hallway. The small, soft sound of a child who had named a dog. Biscuit without asking permission, and demanded reptile museums, and made sandwiches with extra peanut butter for a father who deserved them. He thought about a morning that had started with 17 minutes late and a smashed sandwich and a routine inspection. He thought about 9 seconds. I thought about all the ways that morning could have ended differently if he had been less attentive, less willing, less certain that the feeling over the rule meant something. If he had let the security team's dismissal stand. If he had decided that his quiet life was worth more than a stranger's survival. He thought about what kind of man he actually was underneath the modest job and the cracked tail light and the deliberately small footprint. He already knew the answer. He had always known. He just had needed one morning at 11,000 feet with 9 seconds left to stop pretending otherwise. On Saturday, he took Emma to the Reptile Museum. She stood in front of a Burmese python enclosure for 6 full minutes, face pressed to the glass, completely absorbed, and she said without turning around, "Dad, do you think he knows how strong he is?" Caleb looked at the snake. "Probably not," he said. "Some things don't need to know." She turned and looked at him with the ancient wisdom that 7-year-olds occasionally produce without warning, the kind that arrives fully formed and lands without explanation. "You're like that," she said. He looked at his daughter. He put his hand on the top of her head lightly, the way you touch the most important thing in your life. And Caleb Dawson. The man nobody noticed, the father who jumped the quiet person who turned out to be exactly what the situation required, said nothing at all, because some things don't need to be said to be absolutely, permanently, and completely true.